Tuesday, what's up Wednesday? How's it going Thursday? From Friday and Saturday and Sunday, it's a weekend update.
Welcome to the Walking Produce 6 months recap. My name is Tiirous. I am in charge of Tuesdays on the Walking Produce podcast. Before I even say what I was in charge of or what I did or how it was for me, let me just give you a little setup background. So, Walking Produce had a YouTube page and an Instagram page. Of course, the era of Instagram. And basically, it was 4 people in the beginning. Each were responsible for a day to post on our Instagram. And on your day, you were also responsible for posting on YouTube. And basically, you were in charge of the Walking Produce brand for that day, or as I thought of it. As I said earlier, my name is Tiirous, and this is my Walking Produce 6 months recap. For me, honestly, it was my first podcast, fairly new to the idea of podcasts. Pretty much 2 months prior to the start of it, that's when I was introduced to podcasts. And then also it was my first time working in a group setting with such distance between us. Treasa's in New York. She's in charge of Mondays, by the way. I'm in Florida. I'm in charge of Tuesdays, by the way. Mora's also in Florida, but she's more north than me. She was in charge of Wednesdays, and Joe was in New York. He was in charge of Thursdays. So that was a whole new concept for me. Get on clean feed, record a podcast together, keep the chemistry while being so far, while not being able to see the person or see their reaction. Completely new idea to me. So in the beginning, a little scared, a little, stumbly, just trying to get my footing, just trying to get the full understanding of a podcast, making sure I let everybody speak, portraying my points correctly. But all in all, it was a great experience. And honestly, I just felt like, wow, this podcast thing is going to work. So one of our very first podcasts, we were so lucky because I flew to New York. Mora had the opportunity to fly to New York as well. Joe and Treasa met us up. We all woke up every morning, recorded a podcast, got in the groove of things, just really got the flow going, really got the mojo or the charisma going with each other. And it was just fun. It was just so refreshing. We all had 4 different ideas mostly, or 4 different perspectives, and it was just great to put it all together. In that same breath, that podcast feel is a little bit different because there's no rehearsal, there's no write down what you're going to say. It's just in the spur of the moment, your thought process, unfiltered, unhinged, just you being you. And it was honestly the best thing ever. It's been 6 months and I feel like I love this so much, and I would totally be willing to do another 6 months. Like, it was just the best experience for me, especially like just the clumsiness of it, or just like the mistakes, because I'm used to making music and I'm an artist. So for me, it's like you make a mistake on a song, you go back to that part, you edit it. But in that podcast, it's like you make a mistake, laugh it out, keep going, worry about it later. And so that insecurity of mistakes or that willingness not to open up just got blown away. We literally just made a mistake, laugh about it, continued on, and just ride through the whole thing. It was pretty awesome. With that being said, there were also stresses. These last 6 months of this podcast were somewhat stressful. Not stressful in the worst way, but stressful. Especially when it was changing. For example, you had to do 3 posts on Instagram about 3 different topics. Then you had to set a goal, and then you had to upload on YouTube. And that seems like 20 minutes worth of work, or at the most. But at the time, Treasa and I were pushing a music video. Mora was busy. Joe was busy with, I'm going to say acting or theater class. I'm not sure what it was. But it was just like okay, it's your day. You have to get this done. And it was one of those challenges where it was challenging maybe, but it was totally worth it in my opinion. Especially when I'd watch somebody's post on YouTube and you'd listen to their perspective or their day or their overall daily goal for next week or their overall accomplishment or lack thereof of that goal the next week. It was just like you get to see into everybody else's world. Everybody had like their own little show type of thing. And it was just like, okay, I wonder what Joe's doing next Thursday or what's Treasa doing Monday. And it was just exciting. Also, adding to the hecticness, Treasa was going live daily. She was making outfits, making masks, making patterns, making YouTube videos on how to do all that. Mora was, I believe, in an internship at that time. I'm not sure. And it was just like, it's great to see everybody's busyness and how everybody reacted to having to do the podcast still throughout the busyness. Some were better than others at it. I could definitely say I've had some close calls. Literally, there'll be days where I'd be updating or uploading my video on YouTube at like 11:50, 11:30, 11:55, just like scrambling, praying the video makes it by that time. Very interesting. Throughout all the podcasts, all the stories, all the different types of podcasts we did, I'm sure we all had a favorite podcast, and I believe mine was there was a podcast that Joe and I did. I'm not sure if it came out yet or when it came out, but it was just two different people, two different perspectives, two different styles of life, and we were just feeling each other out. Like, okay, this is how I would do things. This is why I do this. This is why my mentality is like that. And then to hear Joe's version of things or Joe's ideology or Joe's just overall thought process was just interesting. It's like having a talk with somebody or having a podcast with somebody that is opposite to you, mostly in perspective and in understanding. It does something different. It's almost better than talking to somebody that already has the same mindset as you, because you get to really learn and study that person. Our podcast was about confidence, I believe, confidence or something about confidence. And it was just interesting to see how I approached things versus how Joe approached things. They both were good. They both were a perspective, but it was just interesting to see the difference or hear the difference. That was probably my first favorite podcast. Second favorite podcast might have been the first or second group podcast that we all did while we were in New York together. And it was just because of the funny moments. Funniest moment was a coffee talk where like we were talking about how do you like your coffee? Of course, Joe and I were the normal ones. We liked just, hot to warm coffee, just like not burning your lips, but like not super cold. Not that we don't mind it cold because it still does the job, but it was very interesting to hear Mora and Treasa's perspective on things. Mora and Treasa thought that straight out the pot or straight out the coffee maker, 400 degrees and above were were the best heat temperatures for coffee, which is not. And it was just funny that such a simple perspective, such a like thing, a little thing like coffee can just spark up a great conversation. In that same podcast, I believe, we had to talk on morning person or not. And honestly, it was like one of my second favorite podcasts, I guess, because just hearing why different people wake up or why people can't wake up, and me almost waking up the same time every day, like before 7, I'm up. Or at least if I had like a 2 a.m. type of night, before 10, I'm up. And it's just like, just hearing the different perspectives. Like Joe couldn't wake up just because he's trying to get as much sleep as possible. And Mora waking up for her animal, which she walks, was just interesting how different people do things for different reasons or why everybody woke up at this specific time. Actually, my favorite podcast might have been a podcast with just me, Mora, and Treasa. We were doing it on short films and black creators of short films. And it was honestly my favorite just because we did one, it was really great, and we forgot to save it or download it. And then we did a second one, which was even better somehow. And the second one was better just because we chose different short films, which was great because we got two perspectives or two different streams of podcasts, or I mean short films, streams of short films. But in doing so, it was just great watching those short films. Of course, mine was about a young girl learning to love herself and her natural hair. And I can't really remember what the other two were about, but they were great. Especially the one that Treasa chose. And I can't remember why I think it was great. Oh, actually, it was because of the perspective after we watched all three of them. Me and Mora kind of agreed on our perspectives were similar, but then when you heard Treasa's, it was totally different, which wasn't bad at all. It was just amazing that we all have, or she had such a different perspective when we all watched the same thing. And of course, it was a very powerful short film. I can't remember why I don't remember it at the moment, but very powerful. I'm sure we'll link the short films in the bio whenever we post this podcast. For some reason, I totally just blanked out. If we were to continue after our 6 months recap, well, what I personally could do different is maybe take a bigger footing in the workload. I am going, or I'm starting to learn how to edit a podcast. And, part of it is that I'm not editing it. So it's like I don't understand, or I can't pick up my own weight in the podcast or that aspect of the group podcast. So that would totally be something I'll do different. Also, I'm guessing I would find more topic or add more topics or just spread the word about the podcast a little bit better, because I do spread the word, but I feel like in the next 6 months, if we redo this or if we keep doing this, then I would pay for more promotion or just word of mouth a little bit more. But we all could always improve in that aspect of just sharing it more. Overall, besides those few points, I think if we do the same things next time, or if I specifically do the same things next time and add a little bit more effort and pick up the weight load, then it would be a great podcast group. If we decide to continue, which right now we are most likely taking a pause, but honestly, we've had some great, just overall great podcasts, especially the podcast subject matter. I feel like a lot of people didn't talk about the subject matter which we spoke about. We spoke about egos, morning habits, writing, we spoke about race, we spoke about the creative process, our goals for the next 5 to 6 months or a year. There's a lot of great titles and great subject matter which we chose to speak about. And honestly, I wouldn't have never thought I would be in a podcast. And just the dynamic of the people versus the subject matter, it just worked out for the best. But of course, like every great thing in life, it must come to an end or to a pause or to a halt. But basically, if it's up to me, or if I had the final vote, I would say let's bring the podcast back. Just because there's so much more to add on. There's so much more creative things that we're spreading our hands and fingers into that would be great for the podcast. Also, I'm running out of breath. Speaking of all our subject matter, just the fact that we had a whole podcast about surviving the apocalypse or just who would realistically survive just makes it like it was just refreshing ideas, just simple things that just turned out the best way, or that just was so easy to speak about. We did a few ones on gender norms, which were usually like guys versus girls, but it was very like very casual, very easy to talk about, very we're on the guy's side or we're on the girl's side. It was not chaotic at all, and just to be so refreshing or just to have such a refreshing group just made things a lot easier. Honestly, I love those 6 months. We pretty much did a lot of creative podcasts or a lot of what drives you creatively podcasts, and it just kept on working out for the best every single time, and it just kept us going. It just really held us up to a certain je ne sais quoi or like a certain standard, just because you said you would, for example, make a song by next week and you said it on the podcast or you said it on your day and you set it as your goal. Now it's like, okay, this goal is documented, so I'm gonna try harder. It just worked out better for me anyways. I was so creative. Every Tuesday I was posting on the Walking Produce page just to see the response of people that listened to it. Just knowing that we had that documented. It was like 6 months of our lives just documented, just there. If we ever go back 25 years from now, we'll hear it. Just things like that just really made me enjoy this podcast. I must say, I'm happy we made it to 6 months. At the same time, I wish we could go back to day one and start all over again just because it was so interesting. Just because it just kept us going and somewhat together because we're bounded or bind by this podcast. I honestly don't know if this pause is going to be forever or just temporary, but I'm definitely on the temporary side. I'm definitely waiting for us to get back. Definitely like, oh my God, guys, I have a new podcast idea. Let's do it. Or at least a new subject. Let's do it. But it's a democracy. I can't decide for everybody. So I got to kind of wait it out, see what's what. Oof, need some water. But I'll muscle through it. All in all, podcast was great. It was definitely a great experience. I think, of course, there are things that we could have done a little better, but of course, hindsight is always 2020. The group of people that was in the podcast were amazing. Joe, Treasa, Mora, and I. Honestly, I'm so glad to have been part of it. It was a great 6 months. It was definitely one of those ideas that I couldn't have thought about I couldn't have thought about, but I'm definitely glad to be a part of it. I went in completely unknowing of what the podcast idea is or what to expect, and I came out excited, happy, glad, full of emotions. Honestly, just hearing different perspectives gave me a new perspective. Seeing different thought processes really allowed me to just absorb it all in and make my own decisions or make my own new thought process. It's been an interesting 6 months. Plenty of things have happened. Plenty of goals have been met. Plenty of failures. But all in all, one of my favorite parts were these 6 months. One of my favorite parts of these 6 months were the podcast. Just the fact that it's all documented. You have a piece of history just mapped out, just chunked in, just whenever you want to listen into it, it's there. With some people that, have different thought processes, but all in all, are all creatives. By the way, Mora's a videographer. Treasa is a fashion designer / she makes whatever she wants, whenever she wants. She also is a video editor and a director because she literally made one of my videos, one of my most favorite videos. My mom loves it. Everybody that's watched it loved it. Hopefully next time you hear about it, you'll see it on YouTube or wherever it is that you visit. Instagram, it's everywhere. It'll be worldwide, hopefully in the next year. Joe's a writer. And of course, I make music. I'm an artist or an upcoming artist. And it's very interesting that creative dynamic with everybody just meshed together very well. Just worked out. Of course, learning about their own different thought processes or their own different crafts makes you a better artistic person. It just makes you a better creator. It gives you more things to create. It gives you more of a brain ideology of what to do to be great or to push yourself, especially if you want to venture into one of their crafts or venture into one of their talents. It was just all in all a great experience. And even when we disagreed on things, it was great because we disagreed, talk about it for X amount of minutes, seconds, and hours. And at the end of it, you'd at least have an understanding of how each other feel, how each other think, how each other expresses it, and what to filter out or what to keep. It was just honestly one of those great things. I feel like I didn't know nothing about podcasts prior to this, and honestly, this was my best. I would have chosen. I wouldn't have chosen nobody else to make a podcast with, even if it was somebody more famous. No, this was a great podcast idea. This was a great group of people in the podcast. This was just, I feel like to me it was iconic. Just like we'll look back 5 years from now and be like, wow, that was a great diamond in the rough idea. And it's just one of those things where eventually the world will catch up to it. But just this style of podcast, just how nice we were, how different we were, and how well everything came together. Thanks to Mora, Treasa, and Joe for editing. It just worked out perfectly.
Friday and Saturday and Sunday. It's a weekend.